Okay, I'm gonna take a guess that that we're live at this point in time. Uh, so, if so, welcome and welcome back. I'm having another go at this live podcast. The last one, when I played the snippet of it back, yes, indeed, had some technical issues. So, thank you for letting me know, the eagle-eyed among you. This may have technical issues as well. You seem to be juddering a bit the video. Hopefully, with a different camera, that has improved. We shall see. Anyway, that's all the fun of going live. What I wanted to talk about in this live episode of the podcast was that sense of feeling hollow, that sense of emptiness. Not as much physical, although it can be a physical sensation. What I mean by not as much physical is not as much connected to a physical need like hunger, for example, or maybe a kind of, an issue because you've overtrained, something like that. What I mean is that sense of just emptiness in terms of spirit, for want of a better word. And to help understand, hopefully, what I'm talking about, I'm going to access a couple of articles, but just pick out a few snippets from the articles. They're really good if you're interested in the subject, worth a read. And there's more about this area than I'm going to talk about. One of the reasons that I'm talking about it now is because I have found that not only have I been experiencing this over the years, off and on, not permanently, but quite a few other people do as well, and yet it is something that isn't talked about that much. So you'll see here from this first article, the title is Why We Feel Empty. And if I go to the next page, it begins, feeling empty can be a frightening and painful experience. When we feel emotional emptiness, we feel hollow, like there is simply nothing inside of us. And if you do any reading in this area, you may well find that this phrase, emotional emptiness, is used. I'm not sure that is what everyone is necessarily feeling. I think there can be emotions there, but also a sense of hollowness. And as usual in anything that is connected with people and psychology and psychiatry, it's not exact because people aren't exact and people are unique and everyone's experience is unique. But anyway, let's go with that because some people will feel emotional emptiness. The article goes on. This feeling can be very different from the heavy and overwhelming feelings of depression, panic, or anger, which weigh us down because they seem to permeate every aspect of our being. Now, to pick up on that, the depression, panic, or anger, that can also at times make us feel hollow inside, psychologically hollow, particularly depression. So it's not to say that it wouldn't be depression. And one of the reasons that we may experience that sense of hollowness and emptiness could be because there's something specific going on. As we'll see, ultimately there probably is something specific, but we might not be able to give it a name. We can say what might be causing it, but it isn't a specific diagnosis or diagnosis attached to it or diagnoses attached to it. So emotional emptiness is more of an uncomfortable lightness where we feel untethered. Now, I think that's a really good way to describe it. I think there is a feeling of being untethered. I think for me, and again, everyone is different, as I say, but a sense of drift. When I went live 5 minutes ago and then had to restart, which hopefully I won't have to do again, but maybe I will. But anyway, what I mentioned there was that for me, there is a sense of not being connected, not being necessarily connected to the environment, and having less of a sense of agency, the ability to go and change things in our lives. Self-efficacy, it's sometimes called, that we're sort of in it, but not really able to do much with it. Or another way to describe it could be if you imagine that if you've ever seen, maybe you've done this actually, but I've only ever seen it on TV or in a movie where someone, they've got to handle something hazardous. So there's like a glass window, and they can stick their hands through into these sort of sleeves and gloves because things are so hazardous, and they manipulate things on the other side of the glass, but it's not quite the same. You don't feel quite as connected. So for me, although it's sort of full body suit and maybe virtual reality glasses, you can feel just a little bit out of sync with people around and the environment. And that could mean other things if it were extreme, but I'm not talking about an extreme sense of disassociation. I'm talking about just that sense of lightness, that sense of not being fully connected to what you intend to do. And sometimes the intention can dissipate as well because of that sense of hollowness. So let's read on. This feeling can be destabilizing as we feel disconnected from ourselves and others, and therefore unsure of how to navigate our experience in the world. And there it says it there, that sense of being disconnected. And remember, everyone is different. This experience can be different for other people, but if you were analysing the data and looking at the sort of phenomenological aspect of what people were saying, the lived experience, in essence, a lot of people will say it is empty, it's hollow, there's a sense of disconnect, not actually in touch properly with people. But again, we're not talking about something that's disassociative. That would be, it could be that, but that's not what I'm referring to here. What I hope to get to is something that isn't necessarily going to be in the diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders. So it's not as extreme as that. Although, as we'll see, those things that are in the DSM can be a cause, which will hopefully make sense in a little while. What can make us feel even more unsettled when we feel empty is that we may blame ourselves for our emptiness. Absolutely. And I've talked to a few people about this, and I've been there as well. You think, okay, what is it that I haven't done? What am I not doing? And it's not a bad thing to self-reflect. It's not a bad thing to consider how we have been, what our behaviours are like, how we are interacting or not. To not do that, to have that lower level of self-awareness can hamper us. So it's not that we shouldn't reflect, but in actual fact, we're reflecting on something that we're feeling intrinsically, and blaming ourselves for that is not a good idea. So it can make us feel more unsettled. So it's not about blame at all. It's something we're experiencing. Reflecting generally is a good thing, and it's not a bad idea to ask the question, but we shouldn't get into blame. Anyway, we may even recall times when we didn't feel so empty and wish we could return to those times. We curse ourselves and ask, what is wrong with us? And I think that's quite common, for sure. What is wrong with us? What has been going on? What is going on? Why have I ended up like this? What is wrong with me? Again, as it says there. In these cases, we will often do anything we can to feel something. Might take drugs, unhealthy food. I'm not sure what the algorithms will say, but you can read it there. Anything to feel something. To be sure, there are situations in which our emptiness is an indication that there is something wrong. We may have a biological predisposition to experience specific mental illnesses that leave us vulnerable to feelings of emptiness. For example, when we struggle with mood disorders, we often have an inability to experience pleasure. So there we have what I was alluding to earlier on, that this could be connected to a mood disorder. And as I will say later, it is important to seek professional help. So I'm exploring it here, but from my perspective and the perspective of quite a few people that I've talked to, the feeling of emptiness and hollowness isn't necessarily able to be defined specifically by diagnosis, as I said already. But we have to bear in mind as we go through this that this feeling could be because someone is having some kind of issue in terms of a mood disorder. And let's then move on. At the end of this video, or how would I call it, podcast live, I'll give you some of my ideas about how we may be able to help ourselves if we have that sense of emptiness, of hollowness. So anyway, we go on. That disconnect between seemingly enjoyable activities and our lack of enjoyment can be experienced as emptiness. So maybe you've had this where things are meant to be enjoyable, but you're just not feeling them. And again, to go back to what I was saying earlier, it doesn't mean to say there's no emotion, but the emotions as they are may be a little bit inappropriate for the joyful situation, but more often than not are attenuated, they're dialed down. They're not as strong as maybe they were for you in the past or me in the past, but they could be there. It's just, it's like, oh, that everything is just a lot less. It's diminished. The volume's turned down. It's less saturated. The feeling is less intense. Or if we struggle with panic disorder, we can experience a sense of numbness that feels like emptiness. And again, so here we have something specific. Once more, I'm not talking about that per se, but it could be that, and it's important to point that out. And once more, to point you, me, anyone who listens to this or feels that way, to head towards professional help, particularly so if it's depression, anxiety, panic disorders. And one of the defining features of borderline personality disorder is a chronic sense of emptiness, as well as an associated unstable sense of self. Using biological and skills-based treatments to treat these underlying mental health issues can be very valuable in addressing feelings of emptiness. Absolutely. And then we have another thing that we have to be aware of for something else in the mix: borderline personality disorder. Once more, professional help is required. And once more, what I'm really exploring here, apart from putting up these flags, red flags, to say, please seek professional help, I'm also thinking about those areas where it's not borderline personality disorder, it's not depression, it's not panic, it's just a sense of ennui almost. And by the way, borderline personality disorder is it's not the best name. I don't think it should be called that. I'm not alone. It's very odd. Historically, it was named that way, and the idea is that it sort of is in between the borders of psychosis and neurosis. And some people suggest that it should be called something like emotional dysregulation disorder or emotional dysregulation, which I think is probably a better name, but just by the by, seeing as how it's in that article. And then we get on to kind of the area that I'm thinking about specifically for me, my experience, and also to some people that I've talked to and hopefully helped over the years. But sometimes we feel empty for a different reason. We feel empty not because there is something wrong with us per se, but because there is something right with us. We're not truly connecting with the environment around us because that environment is somehow toxic and not consistent with our purpose and our life goals. So the first thing in terms of how you may have experienced this, apart from those things that we have to be very wary of and seek professional help for, is because the environment is it's not conducive to our well-being. And so we can feel disconnected for the right reason. Something wrong, but there's something right with us. We're right to feel disconnected. So that's a really important point, I think, that this author has mentioned here. Let me look at this article, Empty Feeling, Understanding and Coping with Emotional Emptiness. People commonly describe this void as a sense of loneliness or boredom, But it's not just about physical solitude or a lack of excitement. It delves deeper into our emotional well-being. So it's not just about physical solitude or a lack of excitement. Again, we've probably all gone through phases where there's a lack of excitement. Nothing ever happens. Nothing exciting seems to go on. It's the same thing again and again and again. It's a little bit boring. And the physical solitude, you've probably had experienced periods of times when you've been alone, and other times maybe when there have been too many people around. And that physical solitude isn't really, or it's not just about that. It can be a cause, but it's not just about that. And it's not just about a lack of excitement. And the way I would define it there is that a lot of us don't like constant excitement. Maybe you're a bit introverted. You like to sit and read, but if there was too much of that, if absolutely nothing went on, then boredom may well kick in. By the same token, many of us don't like to go on a constant round of social engagements. We quite like an element of solitude. But when we have that sense of emptiness and hollowness, it could be because there is a lack of connection, or a lack of connection to something substantive, not necessarily excitement. Hopefully that will make more sense as we go on. So it delves deeper into emotional well-being. Emptiness is typically the result of feeling unfulfilled in life, whether that stems from personal relationships, career aspirations, or self-perception. And I think that's a really important sentence. It's typically the result of feeling unfulfilled in life. And that is what I think that quite a few people are feeling right now. And I have a suspicion, but I can't tell you. I don't have the stats. I haven't done the research. I don't think the research has been done, although I did discover that quite recently someone has begun to look at this and has created a checklist in terms of that sense of feeling empty, which I'd like to see more of that research, because my suspicion is this is on the increase for various reasons. But anyway, we might come on to that in a little while. So it's typically the result of feeling unfulfilled in life. Not always, but this author says typically, and I think that can definitely be part of it, whether that's relationships, aspiration, or self-perception. And I think that self-talk is also in the mix, but it might not be the only thing. As I've said before, things can be a little bit overlapping, and people are unique. So feelings of worthlessness often accompany the empty feeling. And certainly I've felt that. I know a lot of people have felt that. You may well have felt that. And in of itself, one could say that's just part of living. We all go through that. And I think, I can't again give you the stats, but I think a lot of people do. And I think when we go through it, it is normally a transitory experience. It comes and it goes. And maybe it's a useful check and balance against us becoming narcissists or believing in our own legend. And so perhaps it is that kind of safety valve. But when this is there for a little period of time and it stops us being able to function in the way that we did, our enjoyment of life isn't there, then it becomes, in my opinion, an issue. So regardless of your accomplishments and talents, you might start questioning your self-worth constantly. So there we have it. When that happens, when our self-worth is questioned by us constantly, that can be an issue. That actually can be a big issue. And once more, let me highlight the idea about saying this is not necessarily something that would be diagnosed per se. So we can question our self-worth constantly if we get into that zone, and it can be debilitating. But that doesn't mean to say it's borderline personality disorder. Not at all. It can be far removed from that. Nothing to do with it. It may make us feel down, but it isn't necessarily depression. May make us feel a bit anxious, but it isn't necessarily anything to do with a panic disorder, and so on. So it's this attenuated sense of connection and emotional engagement. But also, as I said at the beginning, there are emotions in there because that self-worth and the questioning of it can cause us to think to ourselves, well, I'm rubbish, and beat ourselves up. And there are emotions attached to that, of course. So I don't say there's no emotions. I know where people say it, but I don't think that's quite the right description. But anyway, this low self-esteem can lead to negative thought patterns and exacerbate feelings of emptiness. And I think these negative thought patterns are indeed one of the reasons that when we feel about worthless, if it goes on over a period of time, those negative thought patterns are one of the mechanisms, maybe one of the main mechanisms that are at play, which cause that sense of being worthless to continue. And then it can become an issue. It can become a problem. It can become chronic. And even although it might not be defined as depression as such, as anxiety as such, we should seek help. I think this is really important. And it may in the first instance be reaching out to people, talking to someone. Very, very, very important, particularly if you consider what it says there, the negative thought patterns. If we are the people who are in the negative thought pattern, it can be difficult to look outside of the box that we find ourselves in. You know, the classic, the instructions to get out of this are written on the outside. So we need to ask someone who's looking at the box on the outside to say, hey, what do you think's going on? Not quite in that language, but just speaking to people can make a huge difference. So let's then go here. Additionally, there may be physical manifestations such as a consistent fatigue or lack of energy despite getting sufficient sleep. That could also be a sign of depression. And again, I feel I need to seed in these thoughts because I wouldn't want anyone to walk away and think, oh, well, it's just a sense of feeling a little bit disconnected and hollow. There's nothing wrong. No, we should be speaking to people, and depending on our situation, that possibly should be someone professional in that area. You might also experience changes in appetite, either eating too much or too little, which could result in noticeable weight gain or loss over time. And you may have gone through this. Of course, I certainly have. There are times when I'm in some kind of state about something, could be very focused and not looking at other bits and pieces, and forget to eat. You know, so just that simple thing, and that's not particularly healthy. Or it could be that I'm feeling a bit stressed, and where's the junk food? Because it's like instant sort of pick me up, not a good one, but it helps in a very short term. It can help. Let me put it that way around. So we can all get that. And once more, it might not be anything that we need to speak to a professional about, or even to speak to a friend about. But hopefully you can see that if this goes on for a period of time, then we need to be asking ourselves what is going on and speak to people. Lastly, if everything around you seems meaningless and joyless, forcing smiles while battling tears inside, it's another glaring sign pointing towards this empty feeling. And I think it is, but I would also have to add, at the risk of being repetitive or too repetitive, that could also be a sign of anxiety. It could be a sign of depression, dysthymia. It could also, it could be a sign of many things. It could be something physical going on as well, which can cause a low mood. So these are all important to bear in mind in the mix, even although the core of what I'm hoping to address here is that sense of hollowness, of emptiness, that probably has causes, but isn't something that would be readily diagnosed, at least not until we come up with, well, you're suffering from empty hollowness syndrome, which I don't think is a thing at the moment. So feelings of worthlessness often accompany the empty feeling. Regardless of your accomplishments and talents, you might start questioning your self-worth constantly. As we heard already, this low self-esteem can lead to negative thought patterns and exacerbate feelings of emptiness. But what I wanted to highlight here was that this is regardless of your accomplishments and talents. I think you might even be able to see the cursor. So at least, wow, that's real high tech, isn't it? Regardless of your accomplishments and talents. So part of that is a repetition, but that's why I have that there. I want to focus on that. I want to say that we can have these feelings irrespective of what we've done, what we've achieved. We can beat ourselves up in a way that people would be aghast if they knew what the internal dialogue was. If they looked at us, they may well say, well, you've done so much, you've achieved so much. How did you keep on going? How did you get those things done? You had so many other things going on. You did this, you studied for that, you won in that situation, you held down that job, you looked after these people. Regardless of that, accomplishments and talents, you can play the violin. We can still beat ourselves up and still feel empty and still feel worthless. Look at how many of those people who are on in the public eye, maybe on TV, on the stage, in the movies, and in music, and they have lives that a lot of people would think were absolutely wonderful. Some of them probably are, but an awful lot of them, they're searching for something. There's an emptiness there. Again, it could be depression, it could be personality issues, etc. But I do wonder with a lot of them if it isn't just a sense of emptiness, a lack of self-worth, despite achievements. It's very interesting how, if we're not careful, we can get into that negative self-talk, despite what we've done. And even as I say this, you might be thinking, well, I haven't done that much. But you'd be surprised if other people were looking at you and they told you what they thought. You may well find that they were in awe. They thought, wow, how did you achieve that? But we sometimes don't see it. So here, as promised, are some of my ideas about this. Quick points. And I think that... and by the way, I when I say here in mine, these are from the article, but I looked through to find what I thought was a useful list. So persistent feelings of loneliness. I think this is a good checklist. It's not, I mean, not a good checklist. It's an important checklist. So persistent feelings of loneliness. And we can be lonely in a crowd. And other people who are alone all the time, live in solitude, don't feel lonely. So it's how we feel, irrespective of how many people we're in contact with. A lackfulness, what a great word that is, not mine. Lackfulness in life. Again, one of the reasons I picked this out, I like that. Sort of sticks in the mind a little bit. Things are lacking in life. Might have be able to quite define what that is, or maybe you can define some of those things. Constant self-doubt and low self-esteem. So we get that constant idea again, along with, as we just saw, persistent, constant. Physical signs like fatigue and changes in appetite. And fatigue is a big one, but as I say, that can mean other things as well. And a general sense of meaninglessness. So, as I've suggested already, one of the reasons I picked this part out of the article, lackfulness, meaninglessness. So, I mean, I couldn't have written that better at all. Probably wouldn't have come up with such a, I think, cogent, coherent, important and pithy list. So those are the quick points in the sense that we can read them quite quickly, but they're worth bearing in mind to almost use as a checklist to say, how am I feeling? Is that sense of emptiness and hollowness there? And is it ongoing? And ultimately, of course, what may be causing it? So let's move on to... Now, this is what I've constructed, and some of these, if not all of them, are not remotely new ideas, but I think they might help. So if it's you, if you feel that hollowness, if you feel that emptiness, the first thing to remember, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, you're not alone. This is not uncommon. More and more, I'm realizing, other people are realizing because of researching it, that a lot of people have this sense of hollowness and emptiness from time to time. Now, one of the reasons that I think this is happening is because in the age of hyper connection, allegedly, 24/7 news, all that sort of stuff, social media, these interactions have, they're sort of timed, and there's often a lot of them. So we're maybe on that platform, read that news article, make that video call, whatever it could be. But they're not quite the same as being with someone in person. It's not to say that talking online doesn't have its benefits. It absolutely has. But because we've got so much information, it's almost as if we're all being forced to be hyper extroverts. You now have 500 friends. You now have 500 things you've got to take note of. You now got 500 conversations an hour. And I think what that does is that if we're not careful, it can cause us to feel less connected. It's a surface level of friendship. It's not in of itself bad, although we have to look at the length of time that we spend online and what we get from it. And we also have to consider how much time we spend interacting with people at a fairly superficial level. There can be great things that come from that, but for most of us, and again, I know, as I've said already, people are different, but for most of us, we need to connect with at least one person, possibly more, at a deeper level. We need to be with them. There needs to be a stillness. There needs to be a conversation with a bit of openness, with a bit of depth. Not to say you can't get it online. You can get that online. I'm not saying that it has to be in person. What I'm saying is that that sense of connection has been dissipated across so many people and so many curated platforms with so much news coming in that I think we are getting distracted, and that depth that used to go this way when we'd be with someone or a few people has been stretched over 500. And again, I'm just making that number up. So anyway, we're not alone. A lot of people are feeling this. I think the lockdowns as well really caused quite a bit of suffering for a lot of people in many different ways. And that sense of things being turned upside down, a lack of routine. Now, I've talked about this before, and I won't prattle on about it too much here, but I think it is also important to recognize that because of that 24/7 ability to get the news, if we look through those windows constantly, then we can be hit with, oh, this is another crisis, this is another big issue. Now, some of those things we need to know about, of course, but if you get in thrall to those stories, those messages, then what can happen is we lose the core of not only those relationships, as I've already mentioned, but a consistency in terms of timing in our lives. It's really important it has been for tens of thousands of years, for humans to mark time with celebrations, with performative tasks that they would do together. In other words, oh, this is a tradition at this time of year. And it is important to have those things. But during partly, I think, the lockdowns, then that was destroyed to a degree. It's picked back up a little, but I think there's still a sense of what next in the air. This free-floating anxiety, as somebody called it, during the lockdowns. And I'm not sure that things have gotten back to that pre-lockdown era at all. So I think more people are still feeling, or were feeling unsettled, and are still feeling unsettled. Personal opinion. Anyway, you're not alone. So seek professional help. and I've said CBT there only because that's one of the recommended therapies, as it is for many things. So cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't necessarily work for everyone, and it won't work for everyone every time, in every situation, but it is worth thinking about. So the seeking professional help, CBT, one version, could be something totally different, so a different type of therapy, but seek professional help if you find that you are just floundering in this sense of being disconnected and untethered, as I said in one of the articles. It's going on and on and on. You think, no, I don't want this. I need to sort this out. And of course, you'll see the idea below: reach out and talk. And one could argue that could come first. So reach out, talk to someone, really important. If you're not able to do that, professional help. If you're reaching out and someone can't help, then professional help. You can do both at the same time. There's no law against it. But it is important to communicate more and more. Again, with their attention stretched over 500 people as opposed to 5, it's easy to forget that we can have those conversations with people. We can open up, be honest, talk about how we're feeling. And that can be online as well. And nature. So another thing that I think that technology has done is it has taken us away, some of us, from connection with the physical, connection with being in person, if at all possible, with an individual. It's a very different experience from being online, and also being in nature, something physical. These glasses that people want to dish out, who's the latest one? Is it Meta, I think, and Apple are looking at it as well. They have their advantages, but it's also totally synthetic. It's cutting us off from actually being somewhere. And where at all possible, my suggestion, and I'm not the only one who suggests this, is to get outside in nature, because that can have a mindful element to it. There are all sorts of changes that happen in terms of our psychology and our physiology. Some studies show that blood pressure gets lowered pretty quickly in nature just by walking around. And of course there's exercise as well, which walking is, and you could run and cycle in nature, so it's kind of a double benefit. But just being in nature, sitting on a chair, a desk, a bench, somewhere out there where you're looking at it or you're in it, I think is hugely beneficial. And I, for one, think it is a dangerous road to take if everything is online. I'm not saying that looks like it's round the corner, but one could see how easy it would be to do things online, and some people will. I do worry about these kids who are gaming all the time, although it is said that they get some good social interaction from that, so it's not necessarily all bad, but outdoors is important. Mindfulness, meditation and or being. What that means is we can literally practice mindfulness meditation. And I find that to be really useful. And I find that I notice it when I'm not doing it. And the and or being mindful is just to differentiate between the two, because people talk about mindfulness, and there's specific mindfulness meditation, different types of it, but there's also being mindful of what we're doing. And once more, I think that can connect us to the physical, the in-person world, being mindful in nature, looking at a tree, studying it, thinking about it, being focused on what is in front of us, being mindful with an individual, being appreciative of who they are. That would also connect with gratitude, but I haven't put that in the list because it can sound a little bit too cheesy when you're feeling empty and hollow. But being mindful, I think, is easier to access. And mindfulness meditation, if you get a type of meditation that works for you, I believe can be extremely beneficial, because what you can do there, remember, in one of the comments or one of the paragraphs from one of the articles, it was saying that can self-perpetuate because of the negative thought loop that we can get into. And mindfulness meditation is a really good way to spot those thoughts coming in, but not to become emotionally engaged. So in a funny kind of way, I guess I'm saying, let's not become emotionally engaged so that we can ultimately become emotionally engaged in our environment. And then projects, get involved in things, preferably physical, if at all possible. Doesn't have to be, could be something that you're doing online, but a physical project, constructing something, building something, being involved in creating something can allow our fears and worries to just dissipate, to fade away. Time can stand still, it can speed up, time distorts. You know, you've maybe had this experience, you're working on something, you think, oh my gosh, is that the time already? Where did those 5 hours go? When you're in it, you're so focused on something that time doesn't seem to be moving at all, and yet it is. And so that sense of flow is physically and mentally exceptionally good for us as well. And then lastly on this list, social comparison. And social comparison is something I've talked about before. It is often an issue, funnily enough, at this time of year, as we head towards the so-called festive season, where people will look out and compare themselves to others. Now, there's two main types of social comparison. One is downward and the other is upward. So downward social comparison is where we look at ourselves and think, well, I'm much better off than so-and-so. We look at other people and we think, oh my gosh, they're so much better off than I am. And that can be because of the lifestyle, because of the trinkets that they have upwards, but it can also be downwards. And the issue there is, well, two traps. I was mentioning two. I'm sure there's more than two. But when we practice downward social comparison, what we can end up doing is looking at people and thinking, well, look at how much better I am than you. Look at all the things that I have that you don't. And that's hardly empathic. And I don't think it adds to helping to create a good society or maintaining it. It's not nice. It's pretty disgusting, really, when people do that. And in essence, what we should be doing is saying, can I help this individual? But that's downward comparison. So it can be both good, let's help them, and bad, we look down on them. Upward social comparison is where, like why I mentioned this time of year, we can look at other people and go, they're going to have the best holiday celebrations, if that's how you would call it. I and a lot of people I know would call it Christmas at this time of year, but that festive season is something that can be a little bit miserable for a lot of people because they have that sense of hollowness and emptiness and loneliness. But we may not have that, but we look at other people and think, oh, it looks perfect. Look at the tinsel and the way the house is decorated and laughter because there's a party going on, obviously, and a lot of people, a lot of friends. And that's not good for us. And the thing to remember is that we've no idea what's going on behind closed doors. People can look like they're having the best time and they're not. I've already talked about that. You may have experienced this. When we hear the detail, we find out. And I also mentioned, look at people in the public eye. Later on, you hear, well, they had all that money, but they weren't remotely happy. They were not in a place where one could say that they felt fulfilled. It looks like the opposite. And so we've got to be careful about what we're looking at and the story we're then telling ourselves about us, which comes back to that self-talk. So anyway, how are we doing for time? 43 minutes. Well, if you've been listening to that or bits and pieces of it, I hope you found it useful. And one of the big things, just to finish off, that I believe that we need to do to help ourselves become more psychologically robust, and that can therefore additionally help with this sense of feeling hollow and empty, is to have meaning and purpose. Meaning and purpose. If you're feeling hollow and empty or have felt that, you may well also have felt, what is my purpose? I don't know if I'm doing anything. I don't know, what to do. Life's a little bit meaningless. It's lost its meaning. It's lost its joy. I've lost a connection with it. And again, speak to friends, and if required, seek that professional help. And in the mix, I would say we need to look at meaning and purpose, because that can be a huge antidote to a lot of things, alongside some of those ideas that I've just laid out. So in the not too distant future, I will talk about meaning and purpose. Anyway, for the moment, from me, let me just end the stream, which may not end it the way things have been going. So you'll see me fiddling about with a computer. But thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And I didn't see any questions come in. So if you have any, leave them in the